Chapter 3. Next came the preparing. In the meeting house, while snow fell outside, Hanost announced to the others that he had stolen the bikes, as promised. Lowdown pulled a pair of blasters from a rucksack, kept one, and gave the other to Hanost. Then he upended the sack, and 4 short, curved swords went clattering out onto the floor. Before everyone could take their choice, he picked up one that was clearly of higher quality than the others, and presented it to Scylla. She had expected no less. Of course, she had no intention of using it. She hated people, but she didn't hate them enough to stir up the kind of trouble a murder would cause. The weapons, she thought, were only for show, and if for some reason someone did have to die, Lowdown would surely handle it. The Dorska brother who knew how to cook dust stayed tight-lipped about the process. Clearly, he relished being indispensable. But he was not very bright, so Scylla could trick him into revealing a few hints. One of his hints was that it was useful to have a Duros jar, because its shape lent itself to the distillation process. There was a Duros jar at the animal hospital, and Scylla got as far as speculating how much use they would have for it if she stole it. But she decided not to mix business with pleasure, and she never told any of her friends about the jar, nor did she touch it. A week later, the night of the heist came. Hanost brought the bikes, with suitcases power-coupled to the backs for storing the loot. 6 people, bundled up against the cold, dry, crystalline air, piled onto 2 speeder bikes, and with their headlights blazing against the darkness, they rode out into the snow-flattened prairie, across the county line into Pio County. They got on a dirt road, which was now a frozen mud road, and as they neared the ambush point, the road went from being a cleared path in the prairie to a trough in the soil, then a trench with wavy, irregular walls. It was a meandering river that had dried up long ago, and now served as a highway. Soon, the walls of the trench rode higher than Scylla's head, and she was reminded of a salt mine she had seen on a school field trip 5 years ago. The world was nothing but a broad, flat stretch of icy mud that weaved back and forth, with 2 sloped walls of earth and the sky above. Aside from the speeder's headlights, there were no artificial lights as far as could be seen, and Yostin had no moon, so there was nothing to obscure the stark brilliance of the stars. The ride took hours, and they only saw 2 other vehicles on the way, one articulated hover truck pulling a tank of something, and one automated harvester. Then they found the site of their ambush. A thin little service ramp led from the floor of the trench up to ground level, and after coaxing their bikes up, they surfaced in the sea of snow under which they'd been submerged. Scylla stopped for a moment to take it in. On Yostin, it was as ordinary as dirt to see for dozens of clicks. But here, there was nothing in any direction. The land was a vast, rolling white void underneath the vast, star-studded void of space. A few ice-caked farmhouses, barely discernible in the starlight, promised habitation somewhere, and a black hill or 2 broke the flatness of the blue-gray horizon, but besides that, they were completely alone. It was a sad, bleak kind of beauty, but it still touched her. Lowdown and the spacey girl took a knee at the edge of the meander and peered down into it, watching for their prey. It looked like a boring job, and Scylla was happy to leave them to it. She lay back in the powder and relaxed. "They're here." As soon as she heard it pointed out, Scylla could feel it. The low, sick-sounding grumble of an old, heavy repulsor engine. Crawling up to the edge, she saw a boxy, mud-splattered cab affixed to the front of a long, open-top truck bed. 2 headlights blazed from the front and threw diagonal shadows on the walls of the meander ahead as it rounded the turn. Then there was another one. Lowdown was indignant. 2 of 'em! 2 of 'em, said Scylla. That just means twice as much stuff to sell." As soon as she said it, she realized it was nonsense, because their haul would still be limited by how much they could carry on their speeders and hide. But it sounded good to say. Hanost called everyone to action as he mounted his own bike, and Lowdown mounted the other. Scylla, the Spacey girl, and the Dorska brothers crouched on the ledge, waiting for the trucks to pass beneath them. "Wait," thought Scylla. "Are we doing the front one or the back one?" One of the Dorska brothers made a jump for the first one, and that answered the question for everyone else. Scylla followed them down. The brothers thudded onto the roof of the cab, and Scylla and the Spacey girl fell into the vines piled in the bed. Rough, dry brush scraped against Scylla's face and tore at her winter clothes. She swam in a pool of scratchy fiber, sinking deeply enough that she could not get up swiftly, but not so deep that her feet could touch the floor of the truck bed. When, finally, she wrestled herself up to a sitting position, the headlights of the truck behind them illuminated a big, dumb-looking farm boy standing over her, peering down at her with a hunting rifle in his hand. His mouth opened up to say, "What the—" That was as far as he got before the Spacey girl clawed her way through the vines to reach him, and then pulled him down with her. She was nowhere near as strong as he looked to be, but with the advantage of surprise, she flipped him over and shoved him off the back of the truck bed. He landed hard on the ice and dirt, directly in front of the rear truck. That truck swerved to avoid him and failed, but it might as well not have bothered. The farm boy stayed down, and the truck passed harmlessly over him. Something was happening in the cab of the rear truck. A gray-haired man got up out of his seat, and the droid beside him extended its arms to take the steering wheel. The top hatch punched open, and the man poked his chest through, and suddenly Scylla was looking down the barrel of the rifle in his arms. She put up her hands, which were empty anyway. The rifleman scanned her and the Spacey girl both, seeming to hesitate, and then the hatch of the lead truck banged open. Lit only by the cabin light streaming up through the hatch, one of the Dorska brothers held a middle-aged woman in a headlock, a knife aimed at her face. "You better do exactly what we say," he yelled, "or she gets it!" The other Dorska brother poked up through the hatch. "Yeah! Don't you move!" Wait, thought Scylla. Who's driving? The lead truck smashed into the wall of the meander, then rode up the sloped side and almost dumped Scylla onto the ground before sliding back down. The hull of the truck banged into the ground before the repulsors caught it and leveled it out again. The vines had cushioned Scylla from the impact, so she was able to grab the side of the truck and wrench herself up uninjured. But the Dorska brothers were out. One of them slumped back, palming his forehead and groaning. The other brother wrestled with the middle-aged woman whom he'd had pinned a moment ago, with his knife nowhere to be seen. A speeder bike came growling up beside the rear truck. Then came another, and Hanost leapt from his speeder onto the side of the rear truck. The man on the cab turned to face him just as he climbed over the side. With a flourish, Hanost drew his vibro knife and switched it on. The man shot Hanost square in the face with his rifle, and he fell like a rag doll. At the same time, Lowdown crawled up the opposite side, grabbed the man's ankle, and was kicked in the head. But before the man could bring his rifle around, Lowdown dropped off the side of the truck onto his coasting speeder bike, and he hit the brakes, dropping back out of the fight. Grunting, Scylla pawed at the front wall of the truck bed with her gloved hands, then finally got a grip and hauled herself onto the roof of the cab, where she peered down through the hatch. One of the Dorska brothers had finally taken the controls, and the other seemed to have the woman pinned again. Scylla stood up and shouted back at the man on the rear truck, "Hey! We've got your woman! Make one move and she's dead!" That got his attention. Though Scylla couldn't see him clearly with his headlights shining in her eyes, he wasn't shooting at her, which probably meant he was thinking. "Let her go!" he yelled back. "Don't hurt her, and you can have that truck!" Scylla directed her attention down the hatch. "Hey! The man on the other truck says we can have this one if we give his woman back." "No way," said the brother holding the woman. "We're taking them both." "Don't be an idiot. We can't even stash all the stuff in this truck." "What?" "Plan was to hide the stuff in the sewer cubby in Rapid Falls, and it's big enough for 6 crates, that's it. Come on, do it before that guy changes his mind. He already killed Hanost." "What?" the two brothers gasped in unison. Scylla gritted her teeth. "He killed Hanost! Now stop this stupid thing before he starts shooting again!" The brother at the wheel pressed down on the brakes, hard, and Scylla was launched into the air. She hit the wall of the meander with her hip, then her cheek, and she rolled violently down the slope before scraping to a stop on the cold gravel. For a few moments, she was unaware of what was happening on the trucks. All she could think about was her pain and the grueling struggle of lifting herself to her elbows. The headlights of the lead truck blazed in her eyes, and she could not hear anything. One by one, her senses came back to her, and Lowdown slid his speeder bike to a stop in front of her. He vaulted elaborately off the bike, landed between her and the trucks, faced the trucks, brandished his blaster, and said, "No one touch her!" At which point the man with the rifle could have easily gunned him down, Lowdown being exposed and fully lit, but that did not happen. Apparently, the deal was on. By the time Scylla staggered to her feet, one of the brothers was prodding the hostage woman across the gap between the trucks. He shoved on her, almost knocking her onto her face, and then sprinted back for the cab. As Scylla's eyes adjusted to the headlight glare, the man with the rifle hugged his wife with one hand and aimed at Lowdown with the other. "I'm going to let you rascals go," he said, "but if our son is hurt, you'd better hope we never find you." Scylla chuckled darkly, despite her pain. "He's hurt all right, but he's still alive. Why don't you go back and see for yourself?" The woman leapt in through the open door of the cab, and after another moment, her husband followed her. The door slammed shut, and the truck made a slow, lumbering pivot and accelerated off down the road. "I don't see Hanost," said Lowdown. "He got shot by that old man." Scylla pointed between her eyes. "Right here." "Oh no." "Hurry," said one of the Dorska brothers, as he slapped the side of the parked truck. "Let's get it loaded and get out of here before the boss man changes his mind." "What do you mean, loaded?" said the other brother. "It's already loaded." "He means in these, genius," said Scylla, indicating the crates coupled to the back of his speeder bike. Lowdown was already on it, grabbing huge armfuls of the scruffy, smoky-smelling vines and stuffing them into the crates, then stomping on them to pack them in. The spacey girl appeared and started helping him. "Where the hell were you?" said Scylla, folding her arms. "You got rid of that boy, and then I didn't see you for the rest of the fight." The girl looked at Scylla, held her gaze blankly for a moment, then seemed to shrink. "I was scared." "Scared? Then why did you agree to do this?" The spacey girl went quiet, and kept loading more of the vines. She was slow, but it was still more work than the brothers were doing. One of them slumped against the side of the truck, repeating to himself, "He's dead. He's really dead." His brother hovered around him, as if chained to him at the waist. "That's all we can fit," said Lowdown, muscling on the lid of the final crate and slapping it with the heel of his palm for extra measure. "Let's get going." "All 5 of us?" said the lucid Dorska brother. "On one bike?" "What else are we going to do? Take the truck? We've got nowhere to hide it." "We need the other bike," said the lucid Dorska. He gave his brother a pat on the elbow. "Stay here, I'll go get it." Lowdown mounted his bike. "I'm not waiting around. Get on, girls." Scylla did not need to be told twice. She straddled the back seat, squeezed herself to Lowdown, and held on while the spacey girl grabbed hold of her. The engine whirred to action, and they eased into motion. They cleared the meander and returned to open ground. Shortly thereafter, the Dorska brothers caught up. No one said a word. Now that they were out of danger, Scylla started to feel some of the shock of losing Hanost. It had never occurred to her that some simple farmers could put up that much of a fight, and that old man hadn't said a thing when he pulled the trigger. He'd just killed him in the way Scylla might slice a vegetable. The blaster hadn't even been very loud. Then again, she had survived, and Lowdown had survived. Now that she thought about it, she'd never much cared for Hanost, and with him gone, Lowdown would most likely become the leader of the gang, which suited her much better anyway. One of the Dorska brothers blurted out, "Wait!" Everyone looked at him. "Where's my knife?" He patted himself down, looked at his brother, and then finally glanced back at the meander. "Oh, blast it!" "Relax," said Lowdown. "You can buy 100 knives with the money we'll make once you get this stuff cooked up." "I don't know if I can do this. That was real. We weren't just playing. I mean, Hanost just died." "Yes," said Scylla. "We've been over that." Getting back home to Flatbird County to hide the spoils did not calm the Dorska boys' nerves. When they parted, their goodbyes were strained and insincere. Next was the challenge of going home. The night was mostly over, and if her father saw her coming back at this hour, he would make his own assumptions about what she'd been doing. And somehow, Scylla did not imagine that the truth would mollify him. "I wasn't fooling around. I was just robbing a hover truck, I swear." No. But he was not awake to see her come back. She caught an extremely short night of rest, and staggered her way through a day at work, and no one asked her any questions. When the gang met again at the house, the rattled Dorska boy looked even worse. Before anyone could even get him started on refining the vines, he said, "This isn't going to work. If we do this again, we're going to lose someone else. I mean, it was fun when we were just on the streets, but wow." "Get over it," said Lowdown. "I was closer to him when he got hit, and you don't see me crying. Come on, man, get over it." "No!" He stomped his foot. It was a petty little gesture, but he meant it. "I'm not going to do this anymore. I'm out." And he turned and made for the door. Where he was going, Scylla had no idea, but he seemed to know. "Hey, come on, we need you," said Lowdown. "You're the only one who knows how to refine it." It was useless. His brother looked at the gang apologetically. "You know this means I'm out too. I'm sorry." It surprised Scylla that he felt the need to explain that much. Where one of those boys went, the other went. It didn't need saying. The door opened and then banged shut, and nothing was left of the Dorska brothers, except the cold draft that had gotten in while they were leaving. "Well, great," grumbled Scylla. "So we've lost half the gang on our first time out." She faced Lowdown and the girl. "Now we have to go to Picton's Landing after all, and when we get there, we'll have no contact because that stupid Nikto boy and his stupid vest disappeared on me. Do either of you two know where we can sell the stuff we got, raw? Because it looks like we've got double shares of it now, each." Lowdown threw up his hands. "I don't know." The spacey girl said nothing. At first, Scylla thought she was thinking. Then it became clear that she simply didn't have an answer. "Then what are you going to do with your shares?" Another shrug from Lowdown. "I don't know." Scylla felt her respect for this boy dwindling. "You know what? Fine." She rammed a hand into her pocket and dug out a small sum of credits. "I'll buy yours, both of yours, and I'll deal them myself." The deal was made, and of the 6 people who'd gone after the trucks, Scylla walked away as the only one with loot to show for it. As the winter wore on and wore out, life settled back into its old routine, and that was not a good thing. Her work paid only a little better than her old job at the grocer's had, and it was much harder. At the end of each day, she came home to the same dreary house with nothing in it except a badly cooked meal and an occasionally sober father. No, Scylla decided, this isn't good enough. She tried to coax Lowdown to do something interesting, but he would not budge. Whenever they met at the gang house, he would try to impress her with stolen shoes or by offering her a meal he hadn't paid for. But Scylla found that petty thievery simply did not excite her the way it had, and Lowdown would hear nothing about dealing dust or going on another heist. He wanted only to eat and swap stories. She enjoyed that, but the spark between them was gone. Scylla struck out on her own. With a backpack crammed full of the hard-won vines, she set out looking for buyers. She began with the vagrants who lived in shanties, tents, and tied-together cabins in the hills outside of town. She had seen this homeless camp before, in at least a dozen different configurations because it kept having to be rebuilt. Every summer, the hailstorms tore it to pieces. Every autumn, the fierce Yostin Prairie winds blasted it into garbage. And every winter, the snow flattened it. Now that the dry, mild Yostin spring had come, the camp had its yearly reprieve, and it was booming. A few of the camp dwellers who were addicted to dust bought the raw vines from her, in hopes that chewing on them would numb their pains, but most turned up their noses. They did, however, know how to refine the stuff. Or at least, they thought they knew. Partially. Each one told her something different, but she figured one of them, at least, was probably right. Scylla asked, listened, and took notes. Then one day, she brought her entire stash out into the camp and experimented on it. One vine at a time, she tried every treatment method she'd heard of, no matter how outlandish it sounded. A few of her first customers choked on the product and spat it out, and she was pretty sure she cured one customer of his addiction altogether. But soon she had it right. It was a crude, laborious process where she had no plan, no procedure, and frequently made mistakes. But eventually, she got it, and then she turned all her vines into dust, divided it into fist-sized portions, and wrapped them carefully in paper rolls that could be hidden or hawked with ease. A few days later, for the first time, someone approached her to buy, rather than her approaching them. She slid a packet out from under her sleeve, set her price, made the trade, and walked away. Then she grinned from ear to ear and told herself, "I've made it." Suddenly, work didn't seem so bad. Slaving away for a pittance and enduring her employer's pithy, irritating chatter no longer bothered her. To endure a shower of, "Are you doing okay?" and "So how's your day going?" was easy to bear now that she had a second stream of income, one that she'd earned by her wits alone. It was a thrill, a break from the plainness of life, and she needed that break. Her father noticed the change too. "You're looking brighter these days," he told her. "Yeah, work got more interesting." The lie rolled smoothly off her tongue, and she decided to push her luck by telling a little more of the truth. "I'm making more money, too." "Scylla, that's great!" Taking her father's advice, she stashed her money where he could not find it, and used it to buy better meals and better clothes for herself. When his birthday came around, she bought a few outfits for him too, so she would never again have to watch him shambling around in torn-at-the-knees pants or stained shirts. It brightened the house up, and his pride and gratitude were almost pathetic to watch. It made Scylla wonder why she had not made him a gift sooner. Life fell into compartments. Her dust dealing went in one compartment, and her father in another. He was the one person she cared about, who did not know what she really did, who thought she was just Scylla the happy little doctor's helper. And she kept him that way. Even the homeless camp, smelly and trashy as it was, came to feel familiar and homelike. But there were always unpleasant surprises. One day, when she made her regular trip to the homeless camp to sell, she found that one of her customers had big, glassy eyes and a blissfully stupid expression on her face that Scylla knew from somewhere else. It was the spacey girl. "You again," said Scylla. "You're selling, right?" said the girl. "You haven't run out, right?" Her clueless eyes pleaded. Now that she saw it, it amazed Scylla that she hadn't noticed before. Her most regular customers were invariably listless, uncoordinated, and had no focus. Before she'd become a dealer in dust, Scylla had spent months staring those same symptoms in the face, and yet she hadn't put it together until now. For the first time, she tried to imagine the spacey girl with a brain that still worked. She almost couldn't picture it, but knowing that she hadn't always been an empty shell of a girl made her suddenly grotesque. With a chill, Scylla looked at the other customers gathered around her, and she imagined them as functional men and women. The thought touched something inside her. "I'm not selling today," she'd said. "What?" The customers fell hushed. "I'm just not," and she left before things could get rough. On her way out of the camp, she promised herself she'd never be back, but even as she made that promise, she knew in her heart that it was only a matter of time before she broke it. Work, sleep, banal conversation with Lowdown, and lying to her father did not add up to a life, especially without drug money to supplement what she made at the clinic. And when she complained to her father that money was running low, he said, "Maybe you can ask your boss for another raise." That idea offended her more than it should have. The more she thought of it, the more she realized that she had imagined she would eventually quit her official job and switch to dealing full-time. It was her calling, and without it, life was gray and drab. She needed something to stimulate her. It was wrong, she knew, but she wanted it anyway. And why not, she thought. I've had it bad. Life owes me that much. On the streets, she immediately felt at home. She didn't have to listen to anyone, and there were new challenges every day. In the first few weeks of summer, the homeless camp shrank to a fraction of its size, and its denizens disappeared. They left behind rumors that they'd answered a call from a charity that had promised them sobriety, health, and work. That suited Scylla. She no longer wanted to sell to them anyway, and soon she found new customers. All the time, clueless farm boys and farm girls came into town on errands, and she would try to gull them into trying her product. A few times it worked, and eventually she found that selling to them was easier. They'd buy, they'd vanish, and she wouldn't see them again for weeks, during which time they would burn through what they had and then develop a ravenous hunger for more. It was more profitable, too. They had more money, and a few of them even had access to the raw material from which Scylla made the dust. They could be convinced to part with it for a pitifully small sum, and with that, Scylla had a sustainable operation. Lowdown was no use anymore, and Scylla avoided the spacey girl. But there were new faces on the streets, kids who respected her for being established. She took under her wing 2 Twi'lek kids, a blue-skinned girl and a red-skinned boy. They were not Rennie and Norin, but reminded her of them, and that amused her. She taught them some of what she knew, coached them in staying hidden, and told them what to do, and they listened and obeyed. Scylla began their training grudgingly, wanting to get it over with, but as they learned and took in more of what she taught them, she found that their attention and respect for her was more addictive than any spice could possibly be. This, she realized, was what she'd always wanted. For the first time in her life, she was part of a pyramid, and she sat at the top. She knew it was a tiny, dingy pyramid in a tiny, dingy town, but she didn't care. She was on top, and that was what mattered. Her job at the animal clinic dimmed in comparison. There was no one day when Scylla decided that she wanted to switch to part-time work, but when she announced it, her boss took the news with such resignation that Scylla knew she had seen it coming too. Now, for the first time, she could divide her time evenly between the 3 compartments of her life. But they wouldn't stay separate. One morning, as she arrived at the clinic to start another shift, and as she reached for the handle of the back door, she noticed that she was not alone. 2 shady characters followed her, and when she turned to face them, she saw that they were her 2 shady characters. "Hey, boss," said the boy. "We found out you work here." "Why didn't you tell us?" asked the girl. "Come on, let's get in there." Off limits, said Scylla. This is not what I told you to do. You told us to go break some eggs, said the boy. And come on, you even have the key for this place. It'll be easy. I said no. The door punched open, and the doctor stuck her head out. Scylla? Who are these two? Worry laced her voice. I don't know, Scylla replied. I've never seen them before. She flashed her minions a look that said, Don't you dare reveal me. Look! The boy pointed at the doctor. There she is! Let's get her! Scylla clamped her hand on her blade and drew it with the most aggressive flourish she could manage. I swear, she growled at them, if you take one more step, I'm going to make mincemeat out of both of you! That, finally, got their attention. They looked at her, looked at each other, then looked at her again, unsure of what to do. She gave them a hint. Get lost! They obeyed. The doctor let out a sigh of relief. Oh, Scylla, that was close. Why didn't you go get the rifle? Scylla asked her. An antique blaster rifle hung in the back of the pantry for this exact purpose. And leave you here with those murderers? I couldn't do that to you. Huh. Scylla sheathed her sword. No idea what they wanted with me. It was a lie, but as she said it, she realized that she would have defended her boss from those minions even if they hadn't been her own. Guess I just hate it when people cross me.